Long before the morning sun stretched across the Capitol dome, America was already wide awake, gripped by a headline that seemed to split the country in two. Anthony Fauci called Kennedy uninformed. It was the kind of statement that carried weight not only because of who said it, but because of what it implied. Dr. Anthony Fauci, long seen as a steady, if sometimes polarizing, public health figure, had spoken sharply in a televised interview the night before. He hadn't raised his voice, and he hadn't appeared angry, but the words landed like the crack of a judge's gavel. For some, his comment was overdue. For others, it was an unnecessary jab. For everyone, it was a spark. And sparks, in a country already tense with political noise, tend to catch fire quickly. By the time the East Coast was pouring its first cups of coffee, social media had erupted. Screens lit up with reactions of outrage, approval, confusion, curiosity. Kennedy supporters called the comment dismissive. Critics insisted it was accurate, but underneath the arguments was something deeper: exhaustion. People were tired of waking up to conflict, yet here they were again, gripped by two familiar names, two familiar viewpoints, and a nation desperate for something to feel hopeful about. Somewhere in a quiet house miles from the frenzy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. sat at his kitchen table reading the quote for the third time. He was used to criticism. His political path had never been lined with easy applause, but this moment felt heavier, not because of the words themselves, but because of the timing. The country was raw. Americans were carrying their own battles: rising costs, lingering medical fears, family divisions that stretched across dinner tables like invisible walls. People weren't just reacting to Fauci's words, they were reacting to years of tension. And somehow, Kennedy sensed, they were looking to him to shape the next step. His advisors had arrived early, buzzing with strategy. "We need a sharp response," one urged. "Don't let this go unanswered." Another suggested a press conference. Another wanted a televised rebuttal. Some recommended humor, some recommended fire. Kennedy listened politely but didn't commit. He felt the pressure pressing against his ribs, but he also felt something else, an instinct, quiet but firm, telling him that fighting fire with fire would only fill the sky with more smoke. So he stepped away from the noise. He walked outside, letting the crisp morning air settle around him. The sun was only just beginning to rise, painting the horizon with faint streaks of orange and pink. He could hear birds, cars in the distance, the familiar hum of a neighborhood waking up. And in that moment, standing alone, Kennedy thought about his father, his uncle, the legacy both inspiring and haunting. He thought about the countless Americans scrolling through their phones right now, wondering whom to believe, whom to trust, whom to follow. And he thought about a country that had been pulled so far toward division that unity almost felt like an old photograph, of faded, beautiful, unreachable. But he didn't want it to be unreachable. When he returned inside, he didn't ask for camera crews or microphones. Instead, he sat at his desk, opened a blank document, and wrote, not a rebuttal, not an attack, but an invitation, a plea, a reminder. By noon, the message went live. It wasn't short, it wasn't angry, it wasn't defensive. Kennedy poured his emotions into the words: a grief for the state of public dialogue, frustration with the cycles of hostility, hope that leaders could model something better. He acknowledged that he and Dr. Fauci disagreed on major issues. He admitted that the disagreements were real, complex, and meaningful. But he also insisted that disagreements did not have to make enemies. Good people, he wrote, can look at the same problem and see different paths forward. That does not make one side evil or the other ignorant. The response shook the digital world. Within minutes, the post had spread to every major platform. But it wasn't the speed that stunned people, it was the tone. Comment sections were filled with expressions of surprise. Even those who didn't support Kennedy found themselves writing things like, "This is the calm we needed, and I didn't expect this, but I respect it." Reaction videos on TikTok showed people wiping their eyes, reading lines aloud, pausing as their voices cracked. On Twitter, hashtags surged, not with insults but with rare flashes of hope. TV anchors read excerpts on air with uncharacteristic quiet, as though handling something fragile. And somewhere in a small office, away from cameras and reporters, Dr. Fauci read the letter. He wasn't known for dramatic reactions. He didn't slam a fist on the table or pace the room. He simply sat back, folded his hands, and absorbed the words. A colleague later said he nodded slowly and not in agreement with Kennedy's positions, necessarily, but in recognition of the tone, measured, human, sincere. He reportedly whispered, almost to himself, "This is thoughtful." It was a small comment, but for a country listening closely, it felt like a beginning. As the day stretched on, media coverage shifted from analyzing conflict to spotlighting tone. Commentators who typically thrived on controversy found themselves remarking on civility. Podcasts discussed the rarity of two public figures showing restraint instead of escalation. Mental health advocates applauded the message's emotional sincerity. Even late-night hosts, who rarely resisted a joke, spoke with unexpected gentleness about the moment. Across the country, something subtle began to happen. Dinner conversations softened. Friends who had blocked each other online reopened chats. People who had grown numb to political headlines paused, reread the letter, and felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of collective breath. It wasn't unity not yet, but it was a reminder that unity was possible. By nightfall, the frenzy had mellowed into reflection. Families talked about the importance of listening. Teachers discussed the letter with students. Parents used it as a lesson in empathy, courage, and civil disagreement. It didn't solve national tensions, but it shifted the tone just enough for people to imagine a better path. Kennedy went to bed that night not knowing what Fauci's eventual response would be. He didn't know if the two would meet, or debate civilly, or continue to disagree from opposite sides of the political map. But he felt, perhaps for the first time in months, that the country had taken one small, meaningful step away from chaos and toward understanding. And sometimes, as history has shown, a single step in the right direction can change the course of a nation.